Here we go. Welcome, everybody. It's Gridiron Astrology, week 10 of the NFL season. The game of the week is the Seattle Seahawks versus the LA Rams. Many are considering these two teams to be the best, most rounded, and complete football teams in the NFL right now. It's spicy Gemini, Jess, and Dorje Kirsten here, and we're going to break down the charts and see who has the stars on their side during this power. First, a few key facts to keep in mind. Two most efficient quarterbacks in the league right now are Matt Stafford of the Rams and Sam Darnold of the Seahawks. Not only that, but they also have the top two receivers in the league. Jackson Smith-Njigba, the Seahawks, is averaging an incredible 115 yards per game, has already broken 1,000 yards for the season, and Puka Nacua is averaging 97 yards per game. Seahawks defense has been absolutely shut down, a terror in the league, but the Rams offense has been on a holy roll. Neither one of these two teams has trailed all since week 6 of the NFL. They have both, believe it or not, Jess, they have both led every single quarter they played since week 6. So
Incredible.
this is going to be someone is going to be behind. Someone is going to fall behind. Although my guess is that there's a little bit of back and forth. Maybe not. So listen as we go over the charts of each team, why we are using the relocation chart for the Rams, the Sabian symbols for the start of the game, and what the game chart shows in terms of what could possibly happen. Finally, we'll go into who could win and what are some of the odds to take. As I look really quickly right now at the current odds, I just want to, point out or say that the Seahawks are predicted to lose by 3 by Las
Okay.
Vegas right now, with the LA Rams getting 3 points. The over-under is 48. That's a really interesting one because both teams have scored huge amounts. The average, Los Angeles scores an average of 28 points a game. The Seahawks are scoring an average of 30 points a game. That's
Wow.
58 points. But the over-under is 48, 10 underneath that. So Vegas is expecting someone's defense to show up and stuff those numbers. And then finally, I just want to mention that Dorje Kirsten, that's me, can be found at www.heartastrology.com. And Jess can be found at spicygeminiastrology.com. Someday she's going to tell us how she came up with that name. But either one of those, you can book a reading to get a reading from us for professional astrologers, support our astrology work, as well as the rugrats and complete thugs that we are each raising in our prospective family. So without further ado, please, Jess, let us see the chart and get going.
Yes. So do we want to start with the game chart today, or would we like to start with the teams and the game chart?
Let's start with the teams.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
because this was really interesting to me. And
we will start with the inner wheel being the game itself, which is at 1:05 p.m. Pacific time, which we have to double and triple check for me. And then the outer wheel, of course, is the Seattle Seahawks and just the energies that they are dealing with. The reason that I have it, nope, I have it flipped. So the inner wheel is the Seattle Seahawks because it's easier to track the transits through that lens. And what
Mhm.
I have highlighted by way of these stars are just what was outstanding to me in terms of the transits. But as always, if there's anything that you see that is shining and worth reflecting on, please interject. So, what I appreciate right now is the transiting North Node is exactly conjoining the Seahawks Jupiter. That seems to
Wow.
be a boost to their overall performance. And as you've mentioned, since week 6, they have been dominating with regards to points. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they are both currently Rams and Seahawks are 7-2. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah. So I am seeing this generally speaking as like their performance is on point and will likely continue to be on point as the North
Mhm.
is having that conversation. We also see this transiting Mars at 8 degrees in the
Mm.
sign of Sagittarius, applying to a conjunction with their moon. Now, it is a few degrees off, but in my opinion, it's close enough as far as conjunctions go to amplify their overall essence. And this is helping with their performance. This is helping with their overall athleticism, which again, we love to see. Finally, a second nod in terms of support for their athleticism is the transiting Jupiter conjoining their Mars. Yes, Jupiter is stationed retrograde. It is making its backward
Mhm.
trek through the sign of Cancer, but it's still a pretty close orb, in my opinion. And finally, this is just interesting to me. Perhaps you have some thoughts about it because you are a Seahawks super fan. They're
Super fan.
in their exact Chiron return to the degree.
Yeah, so they have a lot of injured players right now. And
Oh,
a number of those injured players, both on the defense and the offense, like Cooper Kupp, who used to be a Ram,
oh,
like
yes.
he is not playing at full performance. He has a groin pull. They brought him back last week. He came in with an injury and then had a 62-yard pass catch and run. I think it was 62. It might have been 42, but it was tremendous how he was playing with an injury. There's a lot of players who are injured, which is not the case for the Rams, and I look forward to seeing their chart
Yeah.
because they are almost completely healthy, which is unheard of for this season and
It is.
might be part of why they're doing so well. So I don't know what their trainer, what their nutritionist, what their yoga instructor is doing, but they are doing something right. They are not that injured. I love seeing the North Node conjunct Jupiter. That to me just is that's like this kind of like, okay, you have the karma to win right now,
Mhm.
maximize it. Only going to last a couple more weeks. If you ask me, a transiting Mars, you easily give 5 degrees to say that
Okay.
it's having an effect because that Mars moves fairly fast. Usually it covers the entire zodiac in 2.5 years. And so unless it's slowing down or speeding up from its retrograde motions and stations, it is going to be moving at a decent clip. It's moving, between signs at its fastest point around once every 6 weeks. It's like by next week that Mars is going to be conjunct the moon. So it's there to there. I can see why you're a little bit tighter when you're calling football games or sports events games because next week is a long time. So you could get a planet that is a whole different conditions with the games next week. Be interesting to see what next week game is when that Mars is exactly conjunct the moon. Jupiter station retrograding off the Mars. I don't know if I would yeah, that's tight. That's tight. Jupiter was stationed last weekend, and the Seahawks did have a blowout game against the Cardinals,
Mm.
where they just really completely dominated. The first quarter went up, I think it was 35 points in the first quarter,
Yeah.
and 14 of those were defensive turnovers that went for touchdowns. So it was fumbles converted into touchdowns instantly, which says a lot about that Mars being active there, because I believe Mars indicates the defense, Mars and Saturn indicate the defense. Interestingly enough, both were fumbles, so both were running touchdowns in the end. And I do think that Mars also indicates the running backs, as we've talked about in earlier episodes. That's my opinion. I like this chart a lot. To me, it's very positive for the Seahawks and that they may win.
I agree. And so if we check out the Rams, now they do have an earlier chart that is 1936 when they were still in Ohio, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Hmm.
Based on when the owners decided to relocate the Rams to LA, and this was back in 2016. I personally have gone back and forth between the original charts, relocated charts, not just for the Rams, for multiple teams. But Dorje, you think that this relocation is probably the one to work with, yes?
Yeah, I mean it's a new identity, and if I remember the story right, they were the Cleveland Rams, and they were
Mhm.
the LA Rams, and then they were the St. Louis Rams, and then they went back to being the LA Rams. So they have had a lot of identity changes. It'd be interesting to see if their Cleveland, Ohio chart shows a team that's going to go through a lot of identity changes
Ooh,
during its life.
that
But
is
what I really liked about this chart was that let's see, the Rams are on the inside. I'm not
yes.
seeing the MC for the Rams, but if I remember correctly, the MC for the Rams was at,
Should be 15 degrees, the inner wheel here.
oh yeah,
15
yeah,
degrees
15 degrees.
clockwise.
So that MC, thank you very much. That MC progresses by solar arc direction 1 degree per year, because that's how you direct with the solar arc, and conjuncts the sun 6 years after they moved to LA. And you know what they did 6 years after they moved to LA?
What did they do?
They won the Super Bowl. And is not the
Okay.
sun a symbol of fame and glory?
Yeah.
And so that's why when I saw this chart, I was like, oh, look, they won the Super Bowl when their midheaven conjuncted the sun, the symbol
Yep.
of fame and glory. And they were
Incredible.
famous and glorious for winning the Super Bowl that year. And then, 5 years later, like it's going to conjunct that retrograde Mercury, might be a different story. That's a retrograde Mercury. That's not a sun promoting fame and glory. But anyway, so that's why I like that chart. But what does this chart say about the game, Jess?
Not much to me. I did notice the transiting Mars again because that is what I associate with the athleticism, the ability to complete the task at
Hmm.
hand. It's applying to a conjunction with their Saturn.
Mm.
The only other thing that was outstanding, in my opinion, was the transiting Saturn, which is currently retrograde. So, but it is conjoining their South node. But I know that you have different feelings about conjunctions with the nodes. I wasn't seeing anything outstanding here that was like, yes, winning or like, boo, losing. It just kind of feels neutral. What do you?
Yeah, yeah. No, I am not impartial. As
Okay.
we do, whenever we
Yeah.
discuss the Seahawks, I'm not
Yeah.
impartial. I'm looking for like how do I create the narrative that like makes me happy, which is generally what you're supposed to do with astrology. You get like some shitty charts and you're supposed to create a narrative that makes you or someone else happy, but explain what the difficulties are while you're doing that, right? However, that Mars is before it conjuncts Saturn, it's going to square the natal Neptune. And generally, to me, that implies not bringing the energy necessary to win the game. If you consider that Mars is energy, and Neptune, as you know, in Neptune transits, oftentimes are accompanied by a lack of energy, a little bit of depression, a little bit of idealism going in, thinking that something's going to be easy when it's going to be difficult. We also have the moon oppose the natal Uranus on that day.
Ooh.
What do you make of that?
Kind of like erratic play feels
Mm,
plausible for them. It's not
mm.
really strongly consistent. What is their Mars doing? I mean, their Mars is in good shape, but it's not really getting much of support from transiting planets, is it? No, not really. The other factor, just to speak to this Neptune, it is within just a couple of degrees of the game ascendant, which, in my opinion, also echoes this sense of like a little bit woozy, loopy, not as consistent in their performance as we would expect them to.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And the other thing is, I think it's been 4 or 5 games, maybe more, since Matt Stafford has had a turnover. He's
Oh,
thrown an interception. It's like he is near record-breaking levels of going without throwing an interception. Don't remember the exact stats of it, but that to me looks like it could be an interception.
that would make sense. And then Chiron hits the ascendant and then their south node. So I don't know if the first
Yeah.
quarter looks especially strong for the Rams, but first maybe half even. But to me, what do you think about this Moon Uranus opposition? Anything
Well,
outstanding?
I think we're more likely to see an interception or a turnover
Oh,
based on
okay.
that. Mhm. Because that's what Uranus does. It quickly changes the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Like whenever it hits, it's going to be a quick narrative change and what is going on. Now the moon is past that, but I think it's still kind of got this aura of being in that zone, of being in that place. So I'd count that against it too. Chiron conjunct the ascendant, there's some kind of wounding there. Is that an injury? Is that a major injury to a pivotal player? They've been, like I said, they've been very lucky on the injury front. Would not be surprised to see that turn in this game. The Seahawks defense has been playing very mean,
Mhm.
and almost every team they play is really beaten up afterwards.
Okay.
They're just bringing that type of physicality to it.
Interesting.
So we'll see. I mean, it's interesting. Last week, the Rams played the 49ers, who are also an
Mhm.
extremely beat up team, and they won it clearly. So I don't know how it's going to quite play out.
Yeah,
But to me, it looks like it's leaning towards the Seahawks based on these two charts.
agreed.
What about the game chart itself from a predictive possibility?
So this we're going to start with the Plastis chart. I do have the whole sign chart this time, so we can have that type of conversation. But when I pulled this chart, I made a judgment very quick, and I don't know if it was too quick. Because looking at this chart, the ascendant ruler, which would be the away team, in this case, the Seahawks, is the exalted Jupiter. And it's in the fifth house. And
Mm-hmm.
it's doing all right. It's retrograde, so that is an interesting caveat, but generally speaking, not the worst. Whereas the descendant, which would be associated with the home team, the Rams, it's this retrograde, debilitating
Mm-hmm.
degree in the sign of Sagittarius. And it's within orb of being combust with the sun, correct? Or am I making this up?
Within orb?
Of
Yeah, 8
it
degrees.
is.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's also a factor. And in that understanding, which is more of a traditional framework, Mercury is messed up real bad in a general sense. I don't usually utilize that in my delineations. I just kind of consider the Sun conjoining Mercury narrative. But if we are looking at the predictive components, I don't think the Rams are looking quite as sharp necessarily as
Hmm.
the Seahawks. And that was like the immediate, oh, I'm done. I like stopped predicting
Yeah.
for a couple of minutes. Do you want to talk about your first thoughts, or do you want me to continue sharing what was outstanding to me?
Well, based on what you've been saying over the course of the season, which has been really fascinating, and I hope people go back and listen to everything Jess has said, especially if they're into sports astrology, especially if you're interested in using sports astrology for maybe wagering on games, because she's fairly accurate from what I understand. Are you, what is it, 68%, 70%,
Yeah,
80%?
that's the last time I calculated. Yes.
That's fantastic, fantastic. But you've said that one of the things you're looking for is the benefics either above or below the horizon. And here
I
it's
do.
really interesting because we have one benefic above the horizon and one benefic below the horizon.
Mhm.
But it is the greater benefic below the horizon. So maybe that edges it a little bit. Another thing that's really fascinating is I'm wondering because both of the rulers of the ascendant and the descendant, so the ascendant would be the Seahawks, with being ruled by Jupiter as retrograde, but the descendant would be the Rams with Mercury retrograde. So do the retrogrades cancel each other out?
Yeah.
To me, that's looking a little bit like, yeah, take the under 48. Like they're both teams are like, maybe things aren't going to go quite as smoothly as they want on the offensive game plan. Maybe the defenses are going to come at each other. So I'm starting to lean that way based on these charts. I do remember Bonatti saying that the greater planets, that would be Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, give more weight in a battle than the inner planet, than the lesser planets, which would be Venus, and the Moon. And so then to me, it looks like there's more of the greater planet emphasis down below, and Jupiter ruling the Seahawks is going to be more impactful than Mercury ruling the Rams, because Mercury is going to be like short plays. That Jupiter ruling the Seahawks, I would expect Jackson Smith-Njigba to have another 100-yard game. With Mercury ruling the Rams, I don't know if it's going to get to that 100-yard mark, which he tries to do every game. In terms of like the running game, the Seahawks have not been really good at running. They've been one of the I think five bottom teams at the running, but they keep trying anyways. And part of that is just to open up that passing game for them, which has worked. Then the Seahawk defense has been quite stifling, and maybe that's represented by the loose conjunction between Mercury and Mars. What do you think?
What is interesting to me in terms of the Seahawks' performance and just how solid they have been, there's a grand trine happening here in Saturn. And so I think that the specifically the Jupiter Saturn of it all might be fortifying what they're bringing to the table. Even if there is that edge of like, okay, they have some injuries on the Seahawks, they still seem pretty solid, in my opinion.
Right, yeah, in a water sign, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's like that. There's sea hawks. There's a water sign there, which reminds me, I am supposed to ask you about the Sabian
Oh yeah.
symbol.
And I'm going to look it up because I do not want to misrepresent it. But so for the Sabian symbol, we always take the degree ahead of the midheaven. And here we see the midheaven is at 15 degrees and 20 minutes in the sign
Hmm.
of Sagittarius. So we want to look at 16 degrees. 16 degrees Sagittarius, the Sabian symbol is seagulls fly around a ship looking for food.
Boy, there you go. Like my birds are gonna feast. My birds are gonna feast.
It seems to be the case.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, if Capricorn was really strong in this chart because the Rams are goats, then
Mhm.
symbolically I might be like, well, this is speaking more to the Rams. I just want to throw that out there in case anybody thinks I'm being symbolically biased. No, if the Capricorn was really strong, if Saturn was really strong, I might
Yeah.
say something. Saturn is in the first retrograde. What do you think that is? Does that indicate a strong defense, or does that indicate like they get stopped over and over again in their offensive play?
I think that's a really good question. I have looked at Saturn, and when it is the ruler of an angle, which is not the case in this current chart, but if it is associated with a team, it is to the team's detriment. That's what it seems.
Hmm, hmm.
And so, with this in mind, I was kind of looking at it as it's beneath the horizon. It is the greater malefic. Obviously, this is still a day chart, so like considerations need to be made, but I'm kind of looking at that as like a little bit of a stopping factor. And then if we look at the Rams relocated chart, they have their Neptune close to the ascendant, and then I don't know. I feel like the activation does not seem to be as positive or nourishing for the Rams in quite the same ways that we are seeing for the Seahawks. And I do have to say, I am not as partial toward either of these teams. So I'm not coming from a place of like, hey, Dorje, like, go your
That's a
team.
wonderful, yeah.
I am not, the only question I do have for you, obviously in the whole sign house system, now this Mercury becomes angular. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, that does give it a little bit of strength. And I do think that's really, something to weigh. But also, I'm looking at like, well, but where is that Mercury? That Mercury is in Sagittarius. Who rules
Mhm.
Sagittarius?
Jupiter.
Jupiter rules Sagittarius, which
Mhm.
brings me back to that Saturn in the first house, because that Saturn in the first house is receiving a trine from Jupiter, its ruler.
Mhm.
Now, that is a benefic aspect. That is something that it is said to soften the harshness of what that Saturn is doing. I can almost bring it back to like modern politics, and hopefully nobody watching is a Trump voter. And if you are, that's okay. Everybody's got their different opinions. But right now, the people in charge of the American political establishment, the government, Trump is really just kind of like decimating the social support systems of this country. But I go around and I don't see anybody feeling it that aside for the extremely unfortunate situation with people being harassed by ICE agents. But everybody else is kind of like, oh yeah, our healthcare is getting taken away. Ha ha. Oh yeah, the SNAP benefits are ending. Ha. You know, and I attribute that to that we are in a situation where the Saturn, which is the austerity, is in an underneath way being supported by the Jupiter and the Cancer. So there's still this kind of like support people are feeling. So they're not really understanding how bad the whole situation is yet,
So do you
if that
think
makes
things are
sense.
going to
Took it
hit the
away from
fan?
football. I apologize.
No. Do you think things are going to hit the fan when Saturn re-enters the sign of Aries and it's now ruled by a malefic?
Oh
And people
yeah,
are
for
going to
sure.
recognize, like, oh, we are actually in the trenches. This is a very severe situation.
Yeah, for sure. And when is that going to like happen? That's going to be happening during the first of the year when the healthcare prices and
Yep.
premiums for 40 million people are going to go up by 60%, 40 to 60%, which is
Yeah.
huge. I mean, for people who've already been, what's the right word? Like strapped and living paycheck to paycheck, that is going to really, really hurt. What's going to happen to them?
Yeah.
And then this introduction of the 50-year mortgage, which is just an absolutely like crazy idea. I'm so sorry, people diverting from pure sports into politics, but the 50-year mortgage, it's like a $300,000 mortgage. If you take out a 50-year mortgage at 7%, you're going to drop the amount you pay $120 to $170 a month, but you're going to pay over $170,000 to $240,000 more for the house.
Yeah. It becomes a
And
generational problem
it
as
becomes a
well.
generational problem and a shell game. You're not
Yeah.
really saving that much money with that $150 a month. But there's this kind of like, I don't know. I don't know how this is all going to work out, but I totally think when that Saturn directs into Aries and Neptune directs into Aries, especially when they get 1 degrees, when is that? That's April. That is going to be a really like an awakening moment for the people of this country.
What's interesting to me, and this is more of like the global perspective, the French astrologer André Barbault, I believe, indicated
Hmm.
that that conjunction, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, when it occurs in 2026, is the most benefic conjunction of the century. And I'm just like, show me
Oh
where.
yeah, yeah,
Tell me
yeah.
how. Tell me how and where. But based on, at least obviously, the world is much bigger than just a single country, but things don't seem to be going great by us.
Yeah, now he was really good at predicting, right? Didn't
Yeah,
he predict the COVID epidemic,
he did. Yeah.
pandemic? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what he would do, as far as I understand, is he would sequester himself and track the transits through major world events and try not to get external sort of influence from the goings on of like the day-to-day world.
Hmm.
And that's how he would predict. And so I think that is very dedicated, like an
Very
interesting
dedicated.
approach.
Yeah.
But
I
I,
wonder if you could even do that now in the age of social media.
yeah,
I mean, that
I,
seems near impossible. What do you
I
think of that technique? Like, do you find your predictions get influenced by what you read on social media or what your
For me, I think predictions are more what I seek out to predict personally is based on what is happening in contemporary society. So, for
right?
example, what I will do is be like, oh, this happens. Like this, recently there was a plane that crashed in Kentucky, and I'm like, what is happening with that? And that was around the time Mars was forming a hard aspect with Uranus. That
Hmm.
like was the event. It was the opposition. Um, but I will sort of retroactively look in that regard. But what I do at major ingresses, especially with Saturn, is I will go back the past 30 years and then 60 years roughly, and just look at what events happened around that ingress in those prior decades, and then just take note. And that's how I tend to inform my predictions.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really solid. I mean, it's because astrology is the telling of the cycles of
Yeah,
history. And what happens is we get new kind of like images, for lack of a better word, that surrounds a transit event. And that changes as the events occur. But it's still the same kind of themes that are told over and over, story-wise.
agreed.
Fascinating, fascinating. So back to this game.
Sure.
So I do think that there is like this, the grand trine there is extremely supportive of that Jupiter,
Mhm.
and Mercury is receiving or moving into a sextile with Pluto, but that Pluto's in the 12th house. That
Yeah,
Pluto is, and Mercury's extremely debilitated. And what Pluto does for like a game, I don't know if it can actually, I don't know if it actually does that much in terms of how it affects the outcome of a game. Because Pluto is a very subtle vibration. It's way out there. It's not seen. It's a very profound vibration because whatever house it's going through, that house is going to be profoundly changed for the native as it arcs through that in its 18 to 20-year course. And that is like very clear. It also like, is a chronicator for historic events and for changes in the world. It's like what's interesting with Pluto going through Aquarius is whenever Pluto goes into Aquarius, there is an excessive amount greed by the elite rulers who have accumulated power while Pluto was in Capricorn. And then it kind of like bursts into this Gilded Age or into this type of French Renaissance and opulence age.
Mhm.
But then by the end of that time period, that Pluto has completely deconstructed unified solitary ruled and created egalitarian rule. And you just see this every single time Pluto moves through Aquarius as you go back in 240-year periods because it's a 240-year cycle. And so it's Pluto is extremely powerful, but it's very rare that you see it acting in a particularly notable way within a day.
Sure.
It's powerful over time. So I don't know how much that Pluto is going to help out that Mercury sextiling it within a 2.5 or 3 hour game period. Does that make sense theoretically?
Oh, I definitely endorse that. The only time I've seen Pluto be like a heavy lifter in any type of football game is if it's angular, like very close to
Mm,
then it
hmm.
has a
Hmm.
story to tell. But beyond that, and my other factor, as you'll note, when we are looking at like the game chart and the team charts, I'm prioritizing conjunctions for a reason because those are
Yeah,
the
yeah,
loudest.
yeah,
And so
yeah, for
my
sure.
sextiles are nice. We love the gentle support, but I don't know if it's going to be an added oomph to the Rams. I do have a question, and I'm curious if your logic would follow that same trajectory. Mercury is applying to its opposition with Uranus, but it's
Hmm.
out of sign.
Hmm.
And also Uranus is very slow moving. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Within the content, well, I mean, Mercury is going to be there, what, within a week? Yeah, I think that's like what we were talking about earlier. Like well, that 3 degree orb with the planet that's so far out there is probably
Yeah.
not as strong as what I thought, the Mars, because Mars is
Yeah.
moving fairly quick. Uranus is moving very slow. Will the Mercury? No, I don't think that's going to be a significant aspect. And I'm even wondering what the combustion is doing out of sign and orbit. I'm looking forward to watching that over the week
Okay.
and see how that plays out. Because when that Mercury conjuncts the sun, in 5 days from now, 6 days from now, that's when the House is going to vote on whether to release the Epstein files.
Ooh.
And the release of the emails was yesterday. We are
Yes.
so far from astrology. Oh, I apologize, people. This is a historic note.
But you
The
shared an
release.
incredible piece on your Substack. Everyone go and read what Dorje wrote on his Substack about this with the Mercury Mars moment, right?
Yeah, the Mercury Mars conjunction. That's right. And that Mercury and Mars, they are moving fast. But when Mercury and Mars conjuncted, that was when the emails, and
Yes.
you could be anti-Trump, but there was a ton of Clinton and Obama people, Democratic Senator, well, Bill
Noam
Clinton himself,
Chomsky?
Noam Chomsky, that were in those emails. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
not just about Trump. Trump is grabbing the headlines, but that was like who's who of the power mechanisms of the United States were caught up in that. It was amazingly stunning, but it's getting buried, and I'm just wondering when that Mercury moves into Scorpio, where you move out of this kind of like explosive big idea and you get into the deep research of the criminality of it, how that's going to play out. That's going to be really, really interesting. But the other thing that I wanted to touch in there as you were talking about that is back within the game chart.
Yes.
If you go back to some of our earlier episodes, when Jupiter was ruling the ascendant, those teams did not win. And
Yeah.
Jess and I were surprised because we're like, oh, Jupiter's ruling the ascendant. They might win. But that Jupiter was in the eighth house for that
Yes.
game.
Yes.
And here Jupiter's in the fifth house. And so I think that makes a huge difference where that house placement location occurs for that Jupiter.
I agree. At this point, I'm almost thinking a dignified Mars ruling an angle is probably the most supportive for a team, whereas Jupiter, which again, greater benefic, we would think, but it really is dependent on the house that it finds itself in.
Hmm.
I also
Hmm.
tracked a game where that Jupiter was in the second house, just doing practice. And there again, the team did not win. Like they
Yeah.
have an exalted Jupiter, didn't win. So I find that interesting.
A question I'm going to go into with the game, and that I'm still kind
Sure.
of like pondering, and I'd love your thoughts on it,
Okay.
is okay, if we say that Jupiter rules the ascendant and therefore it rules the Seahawks, Bonatti's technique agrees with that because the Seahawks are the visiting team, so the visiting team goes to the ascendant. In the second half of that game, the Jupiter moves into the fourth house and does become angular.
Yeah.
So does that give it more strength, or does the ruler of the Seahawks move to being that Mars in the ninth house at that point?
I think that's a good question. I am not 100% sure. What I have kind of deferred to is looking at this static image rather
Hmm.
than movement of the chart. Not saying that that is the correct thing to do, but using this initial placement to make my delineations. I
Right.
don't
Yeah.
know if, again, I don't know if that's the best method, but that's kind of where I've been. What do you think?
I think that they both hold meaning because this is an event chart. This is an inception
Yeah.
chart. This
Yeah.
is like, okay, this moment has been born and it's going to play out the way it plays out. We had Cesar Love on recapping the World Series, and what he wanted to do was say that Saturn is always on an angle when the World Series ends, indicating one of the teams or Saturn's significant. And it did so with this World Series too. And he's just noticed that in every single World Series that
Incredible.
Saturn becomes a significant delineator. And so that tells kind of a story of a chart that's evolving and changing and transforming. But he's doing something a little bit different than what you and I are doing here because we're trying to predict an outcome
Yeah.
based on an inception. And
Yes.
he's looking at it more as a narrative or storytelling methodology for understanding why the events occurred the way they did. So it's slightly different realms.
Yeah.
And I think if you're trying to predict an outcome, really the first thing you do is you get really good at trying to understand how the inception speaks to the outcome itself before you're looking at how it plays out.
Yeah. I agree with that. That makes sense to me. It will be fun to watch. And one thing I really appreciate that you have shared over the past several weeks is when there is a planet that aspects the ascendant, it suggests a major play of some type. And so that is reflective of the dynamic energy actually directly impacting the game at hand.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm trying to learn about that more. I'm a little bit into the idea of eventually starting to do the in-game prop bets because that is an option that you can take, just with $1 or $2 here or there. But
Yeah.
you can be like, okay, who's the next team that's going to score? So
Hmm.
can you see that? Or is this down going to be end in a score? Can you see that?
That'd
I'm
be so
starting to
fun.
look at that, but I have to kind of like pull myself out and do that with games I'm not really into.
Yes.
Because when I'm really into a game, I get all emotional. I start
Yep.
crying, I start drinking, I start laughing. I scream, and my dogs run up and like jump on my lap or run away, depending on the emotions of it. So it's just totally fun. Prop bets. I'm saying that the Seahawks are going to win. I'm leaning towards the under. I'm leaning towards the over on 100 yards for Smith McJigma. I go the under on Puka Nakua. I do not believe that there will be a strong run game for either team.
Okay.
So I would lean towards the under on if they're high on the running backs. Do you have any thoughts or insights?
I think I said something similar. Let me just check my notes. I kind of thought it was maybe a little bit of a slower game.
Yeah,
Like it's a slower going. It could be lower
yeah,
scoring. I don't know. It could be that it's neck and neck, but I also kind of got a sense of like, not really the tempo that we would expect from both of these teams. But for me,
right,
I
right.
agree with you. I think the Seahawks are going to win again, and I feel like I am slightly less partial. That is what's outstanding to me. And of course, the Sabian symbol of seagulls literally
Oh,
flying
that's
around
amazing.
looking for food. I think
Yeah.
it sounds like they are more on the offensive, whereas the Rams might be more on the defense, trying to protect their territory.
I'm with you. And as we close, I just got to put out this disclaimer. We're not actually recommending anybody put any money on
Correct.
any game based on anything we say,
Yep.
but we are exploring the ideas for our own benefit, for other people to contemplate. And that it is part of what's going on in America. I think it's actually kind of tragic, but it is part of what's going on.
Yeah, I
Um,
appreciate. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Great. Thank you, Jess. And again, Jess, spicygeminiastrology.com. Go to her, email with her, correspond with her. She is one of the greats in football astrology right now.
Thank
And
you.
then I'm Dorje Kirsten, heartastrology.com. And every week or every other week, we try to bring you a game, and we look at it. So please come back, pay attention. And if you want to learn more about our own evolving process, you can look at the entire shows that we've done through the season. Thank you very much. Any last words, Jess?
No, I'm really excited to watch this game, and I look forward to meeting with you again soon.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.